Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Cook, your host of the Grid Mod Pod and Vice President of Technical Strategy at AEIC. On today's episode, I discuss why telecommunications is foundational to grid modernization with Francis Frank. This issue is important because telecommunication is not a side function in a modern utility environment. It is the connective tissue that allows systems, people, and assets to communicate in real time across the grid. In this episode, you'll hear how telecommunications supports situational awareness in real-time grid operations, why stronger, broader communication infrastructure is needed to support a more connected and efficient grid, and my favorite topic, why workforce development, microgrid understanding, and data integrity all play a critical role in the future of utility modernization. We hope you walk away from this podcast with insights and momentum needed to spark change in our industry. So Francis, thank you for being here and continue to share your perspective with our audience. Welcome back.
Thank you. And to the audience, we intend to do at least one per month, so look out, and I want you all to join us throughout the year.
So before you and I jump in, as the grid becomes more distributed, automated, and data-driven, communications is no longer just a supporting function. But yet across the industry, telecom is often fragmented, and it lives in silos, and I think it's and I've seen, especially in a lot of our conversations on the AIC side, an IT issue, an OT issue, or something in between, maybe an asset management issue. So what I want to do is really kind of slow this down and explore the whole communication pathway just to, support really the language and the varying perspectives that are happening in the industry. So if any avid listeners kind of grabs a hold of an antidote, they can help drive the storyline around telecom and bring it out from the background and put it at the forefront. So again, we're going to talk about why telecom and communication matters, think through the end-to-end type perspective, which we'll get more into what that means, how it shows up in the power grid's operation and overall decision-making of the people, and really, dig a little bit into Francis's personal journey of how he's here and what his varying perspectives bring to the big picture. So, Francis, when you think about grid modernization, why do you see telecom and comms as a pathway to the fundamentals?
Well, you touched on it a while ago, because telecommunication, to me, is the engine that drives for grid modernization, reliability, cybersecurity, and all the other matrices that we monitor. So let me give you some stories and some end-to-end perspective on that. So why it matters. If you look at an engine, a generator, and you're looking at the fuel, or you're looking at the transformers, which brings either step down or step up the voltages from that generator, and you go all the way through the feeders, all the way through the end users. You want to have clear and proper communication in order to have accurate data. So could imagine if your transformer has a fuel issue like a pressure relief. And I don't want to get too technical for the general audience, but I want to just explain some stuff that if there are any issues, you want to have that notification prior to your transformer being set on fire. So communication is vital for monitoring, for controls, and for every aspects in the grid modernization journey. Then when you look at integrating things like renewables, looking at our batteries, when you're looking at these things from a safety perspective, batteries, for example, fire, if you have the right communication, you can have the settings to extinguish something like that, if there's like a tunnel runway, to ensure that you extinguish this fire before. So it is all encompassing, as I said before, to ensure that the data, the management, the controls, and everything is together so that we can have, I believe you coined the phrase full situational awareness to the end of the grid. Every time I see that phrase, I think about Elizabeth Cook. And that phrase, really, without communication, we cannot have that. And that is definitely what it is about.
Right. And I'll just say, from my experience, I coined or started saying full situational awareness to the edge very early on. And as an electrical engineer in the power systems space, telecom was something in the background. And it wasn't until I was like moving and shaking and pushing certain agendas or certain capabilities or technology forward that I received full Elizabeth, we need to talk about telecom and communications. What you're asking to do is taking something that we have built as a 2-lane highway, and we need a 4-lane highway. So you need to understand this. And then I was like, oh, I don't understand. Tell me more. And so telecom became like one of my third passions because to build that highway, and there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, it requires a large investment, not only monetarily, but human resources to execute the physical installation of this type of equipment. And then the uplift and coordination of all of those devices to be able to communicate back, like you said. I mean, it's not just one or two assets. We're entering into a world where having communication to the edge, which means our customers that we serve, so the meter, but also even the advancement of your switching devices that are outside the substation fence is an evolution that has been occurring over the last 20, 30 years. We've only had this machine for like 140 years. So like needing that visibility, and because it wasn't available, right? We used to manually operate the grid with phone calls, which, the phone system was created at the same time the grid. So it's just like it's a full story. And so I think, like a lot of things in Grid Mod Friends, is there's a lot of expectations from the external stakeholders that assume certain capabilities are available based on the worlds we're all living in and the rapid pace of technology adoption. But to do what we're talking about, it requires understanding this network or this communication end to end. So yes, very important.
So definitely, and and that's why some of the large utilities and large companies within the space have this whole IT/OT conversions, right? Whereby they realize it cannot be done by itself. It is not, if it's done in a silo, it will not work. That in order to move that electron from point A to point B, communication sometimes is just as important as the electron itself. Because without that communication, as I said before, your monitoring, your controls, none of that will take place accurately. And when we go into this new realm in the industry, where we cannot build enough transmission line and generation facilities to meet our needs that we have, things like data centers and stuff like that today. And we go into this whole build to own and all these new strategies that is now deployed within the industry. You want to make sure that if you have an independent power producer, for example, or IPP, if that IPP is saying that he's producing, let's say, 1 megawatt, or that you are sure that he or she or that entity is producing that, so you can pay properly, right? And all that is done by metering and by communication. So as the industry evolves, communication will get more and more vital, because we ought to fulfill the needs. The founders of this whole grid, they always had it where it had a social aspect to it, where we had to fulfill the need of our people. of the end user. And know that the needs of our customers are changing, and the industry is evolving, and it's even more essential to have that communication part of it, and that telecommunications, to make sure that A and A matches and is not, for a lot of economic reasons and otherwise that, we wouldn't have enough time to get into, but definitely it is vital to the whole energy ecosystem, as I call it.
Right. I guess I just want to peel back a little bit. You said it in the first statement, and it comes up often here on the podcast, is IT OT. And so, I found this was another personal journey. When we think about IT, we're pretty well, we can grasp it because information technology.
Yeah.
And so that's the world of information, business applications, and like really these enterprise networks, that the function of the IT organization for really any business
Right.
is to run the business, support it, to serve the customers externally as well as internally, and like managing those business applications. So like the financial realm, managing your workforce, like storing the data, like and then really enabling collaboration at the essence, I would think. But it was a service to, or like an ancillary service to the core operations of said the grid operators. So we got to get right. So now operation technology, OT, and so there's this talk of convergence, this is the group, the resources, or the SMEs that understand the need, or the purpose of them is to keep the lights on. They are a part of the operations of the power grid. Their core values as an individual understand the complexities of how important it is to have this data coming back and forth. And so, the availability and really the visibility from a safety perspective is at the forefront. And so when you think about an IT organization, they're managing and facilitating the processes of invoices and payroll and supporting the website. So there's this dynamic. It's not that they're wrong, but they're very different perspectives, and the urgency and really the foundational knowledge that is needed is different. And so now you have a world where they need each other, and that's rapidly. So there's a convergence. So it's not one replaces the other. It's really, how do you bring those different talents, perspectives, abilities to bridge that gap to make these effective type changes. And I guess my point of all that is communications is really the tissue that they need to support both. So when you think about the dynamics of people and processes and teams, there's a whole mixed bag. Because, and this is my next question to you, unless you want to say anything about my random.
No. I urgency is a word that struck me there in what you just said, because some of the struggles that I've seen in industry, and it's getting better, I must say, that before, the IT industry didn't understand why your SCADA system, for example, shouldn't be done, right? Because if the email system is done, is one thing. But if your SCADA system is done, or some sort of control system application is done, that's a whole different thing. And there was always this gap of the need for urgency, right? But now it is getting better as time passes, and the more IT affiliated people or IT trained people are now getting more onto the operations side, and vice versa. The operations get into the IT side, and they realize that need. So urgency is equally as important as it itself. So fair point.
Right. It's kind of IT needs a maintenance window, means that they can take down the system briefly, right? Briefly. And it's very where OT needs a maintenance window, it means, weeks of coordination and switching plans and testing and contingency options.
Yeah.
And then really then picking the right time of day and the season so that you're impacting the least amount of coordination. So it's just a network change is really a routine is being done where, like, for an OT folk, the latency that you brought up is huge, how you're going to route it, and then what visibility will you have during these moments that could impact a protection scheme. So
Yeah,
very,
yeah,
very different
yeah.
space.
Very, very, very different.
Almost like IT runs the business of selling electricity, where OT is like runs the physics. I
Wow.
don't.
I never
Um,
heard it so, but I'll take that.
and this is me more curious. So, like, we threw a lot of acronyms and some maybe language around hardware, but like this end to end, right? You have different methods. I don't know if that's the right even word. I'm looking to you to fill it in. Of like, from the substation head, where, the telemetry, which is like your data points at each of those large piece of assets that we all see on the side of the road. We have an ability through fiber, as an example, to have like almost near real time, which is a very debatable term, of information. And then outside the fence, there's certain technologies. So I guess those were asked, like, could you break down, like, for an electric utility to maintain the communication of the bulk substation to the edge, you need expertise in like different communication realms, right?
Yes, that's a very good question. So let's go in the substation, right? So you'll have your protection and controls, and that is, the guys who understand differential or overcurrent or what have you. Then you have to figure out now how that affects the line, for example, the transmission line, right? So then you'll have your programming RTU, and which is, I'm saying a lot of acronyms, so I have to start breaking it down. Remote terminal unit, to ensure that, okay, when your relay or your protective device asserts or latches on this word bit, that the RTU, which is like a central communication device, identifies it and issues that command. That's within the fence, and that's just one example. But there are so many other stuff. They're just their controls and their monitoring. So for a transformer, you might have what is the temperature of your winding of the transformer. What is your temperature of your oil of the transformer, right? You might look for other things like just how much voltage that the fans or the cooling system of that transformer takes to run. And if you're seeing that it's dropping through like continuous monitoring and analytics, you might have a cooling issue on the transformer. So all of this is you have the right metering device. And I say metering, and I don't mean metering loosely, but metering in terms of it could be a monitoring device that is not really issuing like a lot of controls. It's just giving you data, right? And then you have the relays that actually issues controls, your bus differential, your line diff, and what have you. So after that, then you take that and you go outside of the fence. And when you go outside the fence, that's where it gets interesting. Because to me, that's one of the biggest still growth in communication within the industry is still outside of the fence, the last mile, as we call it, right? Because there's a company, and I'm not here to endorse any company, so I wouldn't call the name, but there are a few companies today that actually will monitor your lines for you and do things like early fall detection, whereby if there's an issue in the line on your transmission line or your distribution line, or if there's things like vegetation encroachment, things like that, they can send that back, and you can now go rectify the problem before you have an outage, right? So there's so much within that realm of leaving the substation to get to the customer. That gap there, to me, is still the biggest opportunity within the industry. But it's getting better because a lot of the conferences I have been attending recently, you can see a push by these technology companies getting into that space. But that's just part of it. But all this thing happens with still your same information technology devices like your routers and your switches. And you have to understand subnetting, and you have to understand, nowadays what is classless subnetting and class, a different class A, class B. It's just so much that you have to take into account, because you said it right a while ago where you said to make one change, you have to be done at the right time. So could imagine if you enter the wrong IP address in an RTU or a transformer monitoring device or what have you, or a relay, what the effects of that could be. So you have
Right.
to just not understand the OT part of it, how it operates, but the communication part of it, making sure that your mapping is correct in whatever protocol you use. If it's DNP 61850, what have you, because we have so much options, right? If you're doing a lot of like more generation stuff, you might be doing Modbus TCP or what have you. So you have to take all that into account. You have to make sure that you get it right. You have somebody who understands the both sides of the coin, and then do your double checking and do your factory acceptance testing and your commissioning. And when I say commissioning, I like to say you operate it as operated. In my young days in the industry, it was like you jump or something and then you see it goes through and the RTU asserts and it's good. But you have to make sure that it's asserted properly and make sure that it's operating as the commission is done as if this device is operating. So it's the substation is the gap between the substation and the end user, which is the customer. And then when you get to the customer and you're looking at your EMI metering and you have all of that, which also goes back into some centralized system, which is your meter data management system that also will share with your geographical information system or your outage management system. So it is just so much that you have to think about just to get a reading from one customer to make sure that the bill is accurate. It's amazing.
Yeah. It is amazing. I mean, it's an engineering marvel that we don't talk about enough. So I'm glad we're talking about it. And so just kind of, there was a lot there and a lot unpackaged. And I think a few key antidotes that you stated is, if you are a listener that wants to learn all about utilities, if you are an internal utility folk, but that you don't know your telecom experts, go be friends with them. If you're an external stakeholder who has any type of position or power to, persuade or dissuade a utility, also become a friend with a telecom expert, because I think there's a whole space that we don't know what we don't know. So therefore we make assumptions or just complete misunderstandings of the gravitas of what is at stake if we are not leading with engineering realities and we don't take into consideration that these systems have evolved for over 100 years. They're dynamic. Some are newer than others. And like all things in the grid, there's components that are aged. There's components that were in technology once of that still work well. And then there's this evolution of new needs with this enormous type of access to new data sources that are bringing, increased capabilities to utilities every day. And really the crux of that building your highway, a lot of utilities built for 2-lane because they didn't understand the potential possibility of where we are tracking a pizza from the moment it's ordered and baked and shipped to the house. Like that expectation was not something we were dreaming about when we were building out these large highways of comms. Going on, what you're saying, from your experience working across multiple utilities and regions, what are some positives and maybe even observations that this is a good lesson that maybe I should share with a larger audience. But how does telecom readiness or lack thereof impacted, things that we understand, reliability or just operator confidence. And I think we talked a lot about it, but I'm just thinking like, do you have like moments where you saw
Yeah.
some good and some maybe, oh, we could do that better? No
But
names,
yeah,
of course.
so
No names, of course.
I will have to give you the US versus the Caribbean version to that answer, right? So now,
Okay.
now I'm a consultant in the Bahamas, and so I love fun fact about the Bahamas. We have 700 islands and keys, right? So let me start with my experience in the US first, and then I'll talk about the Caribbean and especially the Bahamas. In the US, the utilities I've worked for, I will say when it comes to communication, they had it down pat, in my opinion, to say it loosely. They were all investor-owned utilities that wanted and did the right thing when it comes to technology, when it comes to telecommunications. I could go in any substation and get the data all the way back, especially the one in Jersey, the big one I worked for in Pennsylvania, and that was fine. But still today in the developing countries, we have, especially when we have islanded systems, where the main island may have the brunt of the communication capabilities and the isolated islands still do not have that. We have a situation whereby recording basic things like your 8760 data, for example, just your day-to-day stuff from the generator is not automated up to now, which leads to human error, right? Because you're recording and you could fat finger something, and if your handwriting is like mine, you never know what that was. So the opportunity is there still, and even in some of the municipalities and cooperatives in the United States, the opportunity is there too, whereby the revenue that drives this thing, you touched on it in the start, because it's a lot of investment to get that, right? To get these substations, these facilities in a manner and the right way for telecommunications. So in the developing countries and in some municipalities, in some cooperatives in states, that we still lacking behind. And the awareness is there though. But the funding, I realize, is the issue, right? Because everybody understands that it should be done, it ought to be done, but usually you're waiting on some sort of, package from a government agency or funding agency or a mandate from the government. And then usually that comes with so much other requirements and parameters that it has its own things like that, right? I don't want to get political, so I wouldn't get into that. But the awareness is there, the funding, and making sure that our regulators and our legislators understands why this thing is fundamental to have this grid that we all and truly deserve, that the needs of the customer keeps changing, that we have to evolve in, is, I think, still what we're behind in these places.
I love it. And so another thing about like monetary resources is really important. But like I think another thing, and maybe this is another passion of mine, is, workforce development. And so we say, telecom is the backbone of grid modernization. Well, like to have an effective organization, I mean, there's a lot of varying talents that's needed. So I'm going to step into your personal journey, but like, you need your network architect engineers, right? You need the engineers that kind of understand fiber, but also like microwave, backhaul, and then like the whole last mile type.
Right.
I mentioned like IP. I mean, I don't know if it's like a particular SME, but like someone that's very understanding of routing and switching and like all that and like coding it correctly. We can go down the list, like as you mentioned, the substation field communication teams. So like the ones that are actually commissioning it. are very different than the ones that are maintaining it. Like there's specialties here.
Right.
And, with all things, I think we are under realizing as a civilization, and maybe not all, but that, there's jobs that are becoming really invaluable or almost priceless because this education, this training, this really just backbone need is not at the forefront. So I guess, like not only do you have that design engineer perspective, then you have those that like the craft to pull the wire, run the wire, program the wire, connect the wire. If you ever look into those control cabinets, I mean that is some serious labor
Right.
of love that takes a particular talent. So anyway, like on top of needing resources, we can know what the best practices are and the guidelines and the necessary needs, and even have observed where the system has failed. But if you don't have the monetary resources and then the actual talent to do it, that's an awareness as well. So like thinking about you, where did your experience come from? Like what shifted, or how did you find yourself in this space? And then you have evolved, especially, sitting in your new
Yes.
role. But
So I'm gonna
what
I'm
drove
gonna
you to telecom, I guess, is my point.
let me add to your last statement and I'll answer the question. So I think there's an opportunity for every community college out there to create what they call the utility worker of the future. Make it a 2-year program that somebody can go to, and when you come from there, you understand the fundamentals of microgrids. You understand the fundamentals of some OT aspects, operation technology aspects. You understand, the wires and the lines and the generators and the substation and all that. Because without that, when it comes to workforce, you come on the job and you come through the system and you become specialized in what area. But it's very few that I've experienced that have this entire talent that is needed, in my opinion, in today's utility support system. And, this is something that I believe the powers to be, the educators, in conjunction with most of these jobs, especially in the Northeast and the Caribbean, is Northeast United States and the Caribbean are unionized, right? That the unions could get into and have a cohesive program that can help that. Because obviously, if a linesman from 50 years ago come back today, he might be able to do it. But relay tech from 50 years ago to today is a whole different ballgame, right? So until we need this comprehensive program, and I'm an advocate for that, and I'm willing to help whoever wants to do it, to take this
That's what I'm an
journey,
advocate
and
for
if
too.
you could make it some way that it can be used in different countries, in different companies, and make it a standard, I believe there is a great opportunity there. So that's on the workforce. So let me talk about my journey. So I started in electronics in my country, Grenada, in the Caribbean. And then, through whatever reason, I ended up in the IT field. And it was just, the sick godsend at the right time. And then I went to school in the US and I did my degree, not in electrical engineering, but in telecommunications and IT.
Huh.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So when I did that with my first job, I got a job at a utility whereby the project was really changing serial-based devices to IP-based devices. And the rest was history.
The rest was history.
So but it took more than that, because it took me taking chances on myself. It took me doing what we call continuous improvement, continuous education, going back to school, reading, learning, getting the opportunities, getting the mentorship, getting the people around me that, like yourself, who are those experts in the field to give me the mentorship that I needed, going to grad school and things like that to where I am today. It is a journey. I tell people that when you look at the programs in most universities, between, let's say, computer engineering and electrical engineering, the first 3 years is about the same thing. It's probably the last year that is significantly different, right?
Right.
So I tell people it's never in life where you start. And in everything, that's the truth. Never where you start. So I started in electronics. I went into telecommunications and IT. I got into electrical, and there we have it, one step after another. So whatever you choose, wherever you choose, know your end goal. My end goal was always to get into the utility business. And the passion for that came from a story that you may have heard many a times. But growing up in Grenada, I saw what it is to have outages in high school, where you have to basically be under a lamp to do your homework with kerosene. And I always thought that shouldn't be the case. Many times it's better, but it was that passion that always had me interested in the electric utility business. And now, today, when I consider myself where I've come from and where I came from to today, there's a lot that I'm thankful for. And there's a lot that telecommunications, and actually that telecommunications, the same topic, brought me to where I am today. So it is very interesting, and my journey continues. And with the right mentorship and just, as I said, continuous improvement, continuously educating myself, learning, and giving people the opportunity too, because I'm at a stage in my career now where I could give opportunities to people, where we have people I'm meeting who wants to get into the industry and don't even know what a relay is or
Right.
what a RTU is, right? And it's my time to give back. So to say, listen, it's not where you start. And that's why I'm so adamant that a program where somebody can go to if they don't want to do a 4-year program. And I know there are some of them, which is engineering technology and all that, but most of them are still 4-year programs. But, the utility industry, the people in the field, not the engineers, most times I said they're unionized people. They're in the field, they have to be trained to prepare for the next frontier.
Yes.
Right? Because the industry continues to evolve. We're in the stage of microgrids, we're in stages of wind and wave and all different this different thing. And if you don't understand the fundamentals of even Ohm's law and
Right.
all the stuff, you're not going anywhere. But besides that, equally as important is understanding how to communicate with it, how to get the proper reading, and make sure that when it comes to data integrity, that is not questionable, because it's a data overload, and if you don't produce the right data to the people in the operating room, the operations room, to them, they will start ignoring everything. So, it's very, very, very important to get that holistic picture of the industry and all the telecommunications and everything that covered it.
And hence why you love to come onto the pod and be an educator and a mentor. So I want to, thank you, Francis. You definitely teed up my last question, which is, for all those that want to be a part of this energy transformation, what can you offer them? And I think you just dropped a bunch of sound bites. So thank you for sharing your technical insight as well as your personal journey. This conversation reinforces something that we continue to see across this grid modernization effort. Technology does not stand alone. Communications are the connective tissue that really enable a lot, as are the people and the resources that can actually understand the communication systems to then implement them. So what I heard is when telecom is like aligned, it's understood, it becomes an enabler and maybe, not a constraint. So being forthright and understanding it and having the people to do so. To our listeners, I encourage you to reflect on where communications sits within your team organization if you're within the utility. And again, make them your friends. You don't know what you don't know, so why don't you go ask? And then understand who owns it, how's it governed, and really start to see the bigger picture. Really will transform not only you as an individual, but you as an individual that's contributing to the lifeline of society. So, with that, thanks you again, Francis, and thank you everyone for listening. Until next time.
It's a blessing. Thank you. Thank you.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.